Thank you for
beautiful
having
girl.
me. Thank you so much for having me here.
Well,
Thanks for
we are going to get started, and we'll see if anybody else joins us in a few
Yes.
minutes. But I just wanted to thank you all for being here for our first session of what we are calling Passages, and to welcome you to Sonjay and introduce you to Sonjay Singh and Douglas Roberts. And Sonjay and Douglas have been on this journey of life together since they were 3 years old. And they were born into faith traditions that were a central focus of their family life. Each with a grandfather deeply involved in their faith tradition. And tonight we are joined by Sonjay's grandfather, Pandit Omanad Prasad. And Douglas's grandfather was a Presbyterian minister who was the leader of the faith community that Douglas grew up in for decades before Douglas was born. And they each have mothers who are deeply involved in their faith traditions as well. And we're joined by Savita Singh, who is a prayer leader and chanter and dancer. And I am Reverend Margaret Somerville, and I'm a Presbyterian minister as well. So two families, Christian and Hindu, who have deeply respected and were deeply engaged in the practices of one another as we grew up and we raised our children together. So in these sessions, which we're hoping to hold monthly, we want to open a dialogue about what it is to have been grounded in such traditions and to expand from them. Are there places where our traditions are sustaining for us and perhaps inform our responses to things in our lives, or places where they're disconnecting? So from the minute these two who are going to lead our dialogue were born, they have been examining the human experience and commenting on it and thinking about it. And since the minute they met each other when they were 3, they have been in dialogue. And so we're so grateful to have them leading us in what we hope will be an open dialogue tonight and in the months to come. So Douglas and Sonjay, welcome, and thank you for leading us in this discussion tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Mom, Margaret, Reverend.
Yeah, thank you.
Sonjay, anything else you would like to add in terms of self-introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Sonjay Singh. I think a lot of people in this call do know me. I'm an attorney here in Washington, D.C. And, as Margaret said, I've been involved in the examination of faith from a lot of perspectives since I was young. I come from a Hindu household. I was an often attendee at Douglas and Margaret's church after our many, almost weekly sleepovers growing up. I have a number of Jewish friends. My high school was half Jewish, and the high school's denomination was Quaker. So, I've seen a lot of faith traditions, and most interestingly, I've had the pleasure of seeing how different generations adapt to faith. I mean, I know especially for the other Hindu people here, the way that, we have a crowd here that I can see, a lot of you are Guyanese. The way that faith was practiced back in Guyana is different than the way it's practiced in Queens. And it's certainly different from the way that it's practiced in India. So you have one religion that branches out in different ways and contributes different meaning to people, both because of generational divides, cultural divides. An examination, that concept, I think, breeds more similarities and differences, both looking at different faiths and different generations of faith. You see a lot of common ideas like respecting your parents and community, helping the impoverished, searching for spiritual enrichment over material enrichment. So the reason that this dialogue started in the first place was largely to examine the way that different religions contribute personally to people's lives, different than how they contribute in terms of a moral structure or a set of rules, but rather how they contribute from maybe what you could think of as the ground up, the way that they seed your life with purpose and help you grapple with universal experiences, things that we hope to discuss in the coming weeks, things like grief, which was, I think, is going to be our first topic. Different religions approach these topics similarly, and they approach them differently as well. But the way that religion is both personal and communal, I think, is something that we want to kick off with in this introductory call. What do you think, Douglas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the personal relationship with a person's faith, as it contrasts to the social and community aspects of a faith practice, are a really interesting topic for me, and hopefully for all of you as well. The ways that it can influence how we self-identify, how we connect to others, and how we can use it at times as a pole to keep ourselves distant from others that we don't necessarily want to consider in group are really interesting to me, and something I hope to explore as a part of this discussion on like the challenges of that. As for me, I currently am a Montessori educator for toddlers in that age range, and I've been working in education for about 6 years, wearing a lot of different hats. Like Sonjay, I went to the same Quaker Jewish high school, middle school, and our families were very closely in each other's practices. Though I will say, I confess, sometimes I worry about how one-sided that road is, because I feel as if my engagement with faith practice, both my own and those of others, has been a very internal one, as opposed to one spent in many differing religious services that I can think of. I think the best way to phrase it, and something I hope to become a bit of a thesis statement of this conversation, is when I myself as a Christian, I think of the upbringing that I had, going to church regularly once every week. And I think about the practice that I have now, which includes no regular religious service attendance. And I think to myself, well, I'm Christian, but I'm not very Christian. I'm not particularly performing Christianity well at this point. And I think that's a thought that occurs across faith traditions. I don't think that's a unique those in practice of Christianity, but it's certainly a little bit my own. This idea that while my faith upbringing has led to a very personal relationship with faith, it's one that has not led to a particularly social engagement with religious practice. And that's sort of what I hope to explore as part of this conversation, this first conversation in passages, is that idea of how those two can differ from one another and lead to almost a fractured sense of self-image.
Absolutely. And before we dive too much into this, the last thing I want to say is that Douglas and I are moderating, but we're hopefully not giving speeches here. We'd like everyone to contribute. This is supposed to be an open conversation. We have topics to kick it off, but if you have something to share, please. The intention is that you'll just, as a small group, you'll just speak up and join into the conversation. Douglas, something we were talking about last night that I thought was interesting, I think people might hear would have a perspective on, is this idea of faith as something that's inherited. Faith is a tradition. Like you said, you were talking about how sometimes you think that you're a bad Christian, and you think of that as like maybe the negative side of it, right? That you inherit these thoughts on what it means to practice your religion the right way, described by people who are older than you in a community that's older than you, and then you internalize them and you think, well, I'm not doing it like they do it, so I'm doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. I think the other side of that is the way in which religion evolves and contributes to the younger generation. I mean, you can look at Hindu faith practices. One my mom talks about a lot is the caste system that evolved out of something that's in Hindu scripture not described in the extremist way that it's being practiced in India, but younger generations reinterpreted those texts and realized the truth of it is not supposed to be a way of dividing people up into lesser or superior, but rather in a way of creating a system in which different, not better or worse types of labor were divided up. So there's these ways in which these religious tools are both, sometimes used punitively against the younger generation, but also ways in which the younger generation can look at them from a new perspective and inform people who are older than them and help everyone come to a great understanding. What do you think?
I think that is a really wonderful point, this idea of the way that how we understand these things needs to be evolving and changing. I mean, each new generation is going to have similarities in their spiritual needs, but also a wide array of different needs that fit into how their faith practice is going to need to be molded to the time in which they specifically live. And as far as a Christian example goes, I mean, you can look at how Protestant has become this umbrella term for, I don't know, maybe about 3,000 different types of Christian practices that all, describe themselves as, uniquely different and with differing practices, united by a common belief that is expressed in 1,000 different ways. And it's widespread in America enough to the point that, everybody's going to find their niche. You're going to find the Presbyterian PCUSA, or you're going to find the other American Presbyterian Church denomination that is apparently aggressively in argument with PCUSA about nothing, I think, besides the fact that they practice slightly differently, order the services in slightly different ways. And I think that there is value to a large amount of modularity in those practices, though I will say in my experience, I have also seen that, as in my example, distancing effect of them as well, the way that it can be harmful to the unity of a community. And the cross-generational differences are one which I also see as being something that could be very limiting should those generations not want to enter conversation with each other.
What do you think about the fact that literally the word tradition means, right, handing down? And there are these supposed standards that some people who are following a tradition feel as if they hold themselves to or are held accountable to, and therefore, as you were saying at the beginning, are not a good version of that faith tradition. And just an anecdote to throw out there is I lead an interfaith dialogue club with a group of teenagers at the Quaker school where you two attended and where I still teach. And these are high schoolers who self-selected to be part of a group called an Interfaith Dialogue Club. And when we went around the room and everybody was introducing themselves and sharing what faith tradition they were a part of, we had people who were Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Baha'i, Protestant, Catholic, Christians. And without fail, around the room, every single teenager said, "I'm Muslim, but I'm not a really good Muslim. I don't say the 5 daily prayers every day, or I'm not a good Hindu, or I go, I don't go to church, so I'm not really Christian. I'm not really aligned with any church." And every single teenager around the room was apologetic about the fact that they were not following some standards that they assumed were out there in order to call themselves a good version of that faith tradition. And I made them all stop and say, wow, this is packed with guilt. and shame that you are not holding yourself to some standard. And I just was really surprised by that. And one of the reasons I really want us to be in this kind of intergenerational, interfaith dialogue here too, because are there these standards that we pass on in our tradition that make people feel as if they are not a good version of whatever faith tradition they are? Feels frightening to me.
I think what I hear in that example of yours is not necessarily a passing on of not good enough, but the subtlety of inherited faith. Inherited faith is something that becomes a natural part of the way you think, the way you feel, the way you hold yourself in not just faith practices, but secular everyday practices. It influences everything. And because of the way it permeates, it can be hard to identify. It can be harder to identify than the faith practices of others, which you can see as, oh, this is a person performing Christianity. This is a person doing Hinduism. This is a person who engaged in their faith practice in a way that I'm not. So I must be doing something differently. And what's missing is the acknowledgement that to be raised in faith is to already have those practices just infused into everything. And people can lose sight of that. I think people can lose sight of the way that those influences form an individual practice when all they practice others. Sonjay, what do you think about that situation?
Yeah, I do think that's. I do think that. I mean, I was thinking, you said that to us last time we talked, Margaret, and I have been thinking about it a lot. The idea of what makes you good at a religion. I mean, no one is perfect at a religion. I don't think anyone has ever lived a life that they could say was sinless. And I think basically every religious text will tell you that such a thing is impossible. So even if you say there's like a strict standard that makes you a good Christian, not even if you do believe that, no one's living up to it, right? No one possibly could be. And I also think about the differences in not just how these religions are practiced over space in different regions and different sects, but also over time. I mean, if you go back far enough, what composed the Bible, the standard books of the Bible, wasn't standardized. There was disagreement about that, and it's only been on a broad historical timeline, somewhat recently, that there's a consensus about even what the books are, let alone what they mean. I mean, you look at Hinduism itself, and it's fraught with uncertainty. I'll quote the Rig Veda, which is one of the foundational Hindu texts. Before all this, what was there? Was there water? Perhaps the gods know, or perhaps they do not. I mean, Hinduism is, in its core, is fundamentally about striving for truth, about looking for it actively. I mean, you think about who the first Hindus were, the people who, the Vedic philosophers, what they were doing. I mean, they were sitting in grassy groves in the woods, just closing their eyes and trying to think deeper and deeper and deeper and seeing what came up. The religion came from the idea of, I don't really understand what I am or why I'm here. Why don't I try to find out? So the idea that I think every generation somewhat adopts. I mean, I'll give you an analogy from my life. I was in this social club in college, and the older guys in the club had been doing this party every year, which wasn't fun, and people didn't go to. So us, the younger guys, said, we're going to cancel the party. And there was outrage. We've been doing this forever. How could you cancel the party? But we canceled it and we replaced it with a different party. And then when I was a senior, the younger guys said, this isn't a good party, guys. We're going to cancel this party. And I was the outraged one. I was saying, how could you cancel it? We've been doing this for years. And I think that's the generational perspective you've got to slip away from. Because just as you, when you were young, adapted things of your religion, moved them around to suit the life that you were leading and the common culture at the time, while still maintaining the core. I mean, all of us want to have a party. All of us want to be good practice in our religion, to get closer to God and to find some moral truth for how to live our lives. That flexibility is something that you adopt when you're younger, and as you get older, you somehow lose it. You somehow decide that the point in history that you've reached is the right point. We ought not go farther than this. Like, we've got it now, and I think that's a fallacy that we fall into. Nana, what do you think as the oldest member of the panel? What do you think about that?
I was just going to ask him that. Yeah. Are there places in which you have had to adapt as you have seen your children and grandchildren approach your faith in a different way? Are there ways in which you've had to adapt and open?
Yes, I look. We are born in certain faiths. You're born in a Christian family, a Hindu family, a Muslim family, what have you. So, and we've been brought up by our parents. You have to respect God. You must go to church. You must attend services. You must pray. Now, the younger generation, because of I would think that the loads of work they have in school, and all these papers they have to write on weekends and so on. A lot of them do not find it's time to go to the temple or to go to the church. And I can understand that. Why do we go to the church in the first place? Spirituality. And we can have, you could be playing and have that spirituality, eating, and you could have that spirituality with you, right? Anything you do, you think before you sit to eat, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And you eat, right? You believe in that. Or we as Hindus will call the name of God. Tome Mata, you're my father, you're my mother, you're my brother, you're my sister, bless me today. So but we can do that by sitting down or and having a meal, by taking up our studies, our book. As I start to write this assignment, may you bless me, God. We think about God, and we try, and we remember the back of our mind the 10 commandments: do not rob, do not kill, do not do this, do not, do not cheat, do not lie, and so on. And we keep that at the back of our mind, and we live by those principles. Not unconsciously we do it, because we have been brought up in this family, and we've been brought up as kids to respect these what we perceive to be right, rather than doing anything wrong. Do not rob people, do not cheat, do not lie, do not, and these are good things. But we don't necessarily have to attend the not that I'm saying that you must not go to church. If you have the time, please go to church. Congregational worship is a good worship. But you can do it by yourself. In anything that you do, there is spirituality. You sit to do anything. As I said earlier, you sit to eat, you sit to write, and you pray to God before. And you always pray to God. You get up every morning, thank you, God, for letting me see another day, and bless me that I'll have a good day. And you pray. You come home that night, but thank you for bringing me back home safely to my home, God, and I thank you. I bless you. And that will suffice for the moment for our absences from the temples and the churches and the mandirs and so on. So I adapt to that with my children, my grandchildren. They don't have time to. Let me talk about my own grandchildren that I have in Pennsylvania and in here in New York. They don't go to the temples as often as I would like them to go, but because they're tied down by their various activities, their school activities and whatever activities they have. But at the back of their mind, they know that we have to respect God. We have to do right. We have to do the right things. And earlier in Sanjay's presentation earlier, he alluded to the fact that about the caste system. I support that. The caste system was invented by our older Hindu folks, and I don't think they invented it as for religion's sake. It's more a commercial business where those at the top will get laborers to work, and they're divided in such a way that only certain people, only the middle class could be teachers. The lower class must only be laborers. You must clean the drain, and you must weed, and you must help do construction and what have you. So as far as I'm concerned, that should go. That really should go, right? And when Mother Teresa, she went to India, and she was able to take those same guys who were denied the opportunity of being promoted and working in government job, and she said that she allowed them to go to school because they weren't allowed to go to school. She sent them to school, universities, and they took their place in society. And thanks to her that she broke that barrier. So, but right now, going back to this wonderful conversation between Douglas and Sonjay, and which we were caught up in, it's a nice conversation. And as you asked me, Margaret, whether I had to adapt. Yes, I do adapt because I see that a lot of people who don't necessarily go to the temples or do congregational worship. But as far as
that's so interesting, and I'm thinking about how that connects to something Douglas said at the beginning, which is, I think that, and Douglas, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a huge social aspect to you being brought up in the church community that you attended every week. Like a huge number of our family friends went to that community. There was a huge social, and as Jillian is saying in the chat here, fellowship was an important part of that building of community. But that
Jillian, do you want to speak on that, or are you happy in the chat?
Oh, hi. Oh, well, I think for me, I do find a lot of comfort in fellowship. My kids are of the age, my pastor thinks that between 16 to like 27, kids fall out of church because they're not having children at that point, and they're finished with their confirmation, and that's sort of the end of church for a while till, they have to get married, and then they'll come back in, and then they'll have kids who need to be baptized. So I think it is a natural thing that sometimes younger people will sort of fall out of it. Not always, but I see that with my own kids. So I do get them to go like a
oops, I lost you.
You broke up a little there.
Yeah. So
I think that's an interesting point. Like this idea that you go and you get baptized, and then you get confirmed, and then you're kind of good for a while, because the next thing you really need a priest to get involved with is getting married.
Yes.
That's when you engage. It's when the religious services must be procured, because those are the people who do that job for you. And I think that's interesting because there's this idea that you'd want to get people involved more than that, right? You'd want them to think of the church as a community for them, and go to engage in it in a way that's more than just kind of checking the boxes in that way. And I think the flip side of that is but where do you draw the line? I mean, at some point, you're blurring what the community thinks to get more people in the door. You play to the common denominator too much, and then do you lose your sense of general community? Douglas said something to me about this yesterday that I thought was interesting, which was how the church could serve to be more of a hub to serve people. Douglas, what do you think?
Well, absolutely. Like we were speaking about yesterday, I think that in this idea of fellowship and church's fellowship, and to reflect back on what you said, Mom, I mean, it very much was a community. Our church, for me growing up, dozen or so aunts and uncles who were just friends and members of that community, the people who became family just by nature of sharing that space. And I think that Jillian, your point of 16 to 27-year-olds finding that community elsewhere is a really interesting one as well. I think the question that anybody who is regularly attending services in a religious community might ask is, people who aren't coming, what is missing in that space for them? And people who are, what is being provided for them? And so if we can find common ground between what the people who aren't coming are lacking and what the people who are coming are finding, religious spaces could expand to include those things that 16 to 27-year-olds, that demographic, might be missing. A conversation I had with the last church I was regularly attending was, I believe I was young enough to be considered one of the young people at the church at the time. And so I was constantly getting tapped on the shoulder like, hey, what can we do to get more of, people like you here, these young people that we hear so much about, into the church? And I said, well, I think that in expanding the space to include some non-religious but community-oriented practices like community gardening or offering laundry services, or even just like connecting yourself to the Free Library Project, are things that are going to be appealing to people who aren't necessarily looking to attend religious service, but are looking for the community fostered by a religious space, or looking to just remain in touch with their spiritual and faith-based needs. And I think that's an interesting question, maybe to open to anybody here who feels comfortable sharing. What is it that you find fulfilling in a church or religious service that you are currently a part of?
One of the questions of that is that when you get together in a church, you feel as though you're a member of a very big family. There's certain happiness being there, right? In addition to the fact that we listen to a nice sermon from the pastor or whoever is giving a sermon, which because from every sermon you learn something. But church is becoming more a social gathering these days, rather than a strict religious get together. And the young, well, for my temple that I have, the younger children who go there, they're happy to be there because they find it, and they find that they could communicate with people and they could share their views, and they not necessarily religious views, but they speak about other things, and that's, they go there. The 16 to 27 that Jalen spoke about is true. But if you marry a partner who is religious, she or he will drag you into that temple. I've seen it happen. I've seen people
wake up at what time?
I've seen people who have me going to church, and suddenly they marry, and this girl or this boy to whom they get married is very devoted, and he or she will come along with their partner. And I'm seeing it happen every week like this, but that's only about 30%, but it's a big majority.
So
I think
Oh, sorry, Meg, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Svina.
So I was going to say, let me jump in there, and maybe so I see Didi Gates is on, and Amrit's. So moving from Guyana, living in areas where there is not a Hindu community. So when I moved here to Pennsylvania, I didn't know any Hindu, no Hindus at all. I tried to attend one of the temples here and become a part of that, but they were all South Indians. I do not speak Hindi. I was not looked upon as an Indian at all. So Vijay and I left, we were feeling very uncomfortable. But growing up, I did not really go to a temple. We always had a prayer room at home, and we did all of our, pujas and our hawans. We grew up with that. And I tried to pass that on to my children, as you were asking earlier about the traditions that you tried to pass on. And when they were little, they will sit with me and we will sing. But again, now you're teaching children prayers in a language that they do not speak, which was the same thing with us. So I think as they get older, that's part of the pushback, because you're right. They start to question that, we don't speak Hindi, mom. You're teaching us all these bhajans and mantras in a language that we don't even know the meanings of. What do you guys think? Sanj?
For me as the recipient, yeah, I mean, I see two sides. And I want to talk about what Douglas said too. So, I mean, I think the first one, that the time when I really engaged with Hinduism in the fullest was the first time I read Eknath Easwaran's English translation of the Bhagavad Gita. That's when I really was like, oh, there's something really, really interesting here. Learning it in another language, it's obviously detrimental to understanding the meaning because you don't speak the language. But the other side of it is, we used to have these gatherings where we would sing bhajans that our families have been singing forever. And those were very, very joyful times. And if we said, well, we don't speak the language, let's throw that out and do something else, something very significant would be lost. So I feel that pull and push, at what point is the tradition helpful to bring the community together, and what point is it harmful? The other thing I think about is in terms of what Douglas said, in terms of opening the doors. So I think you could imagine this like awesome church where there's a laundromat at the bottom and there's like pizza and video games for the teenagers upstairs, and every effort is made to pull people in, and you get a big gathering. But the reason for that gathering is less about a faith practice than it is about a community practice. At what point are you a community center? At what point are you a church? Are those things different? Should they be different? I think if you go back 400 years, people would say, no, they're not different. They're the exact same thing. This is where we gather. It's where we have marriages, where we have parties, where we have weddings. This is the place where the community comes together. It's just under the auspice of the church. It's one perspective. So I'm grappling with that idea. And it looks like someone wants to speak. Renee?
Hi, good evening. This is Rennie here, and I'm in Michigan. So I heard what Auntie Savi said, and I totally relate to that, because the Hindu temples here mostly South Indian, and you turn up there, the language, huge language barrier. And then of course they don't look at you as if you're Indian, So, and then I have 3 younger kids, and whatever prayers I know, I would teach them, and it's in Sanskrit or Hindi, whatever, Umbur Bwaswa. And so one day, Saurav, he is 12, going to be 12. And he said, Mommy, what does it mean? And I'm like, oh my gosh, Saurav, I don't know, but I have to find a meaning. And I haven't gotten around to finding out a meaning as yet for all these prayers that I'm teaching them. But they say it at night before they go to bed, they say the prayers. And it's just, I wish at least you guys in New York, you have a large Guyanese community, and you have the Hindu temples that you're accustomed to the same way of how it's done in Guyana. So you have that community, and it's easier, I feel, to be at least have that rooted part of that culture still passed on. For me, I struggle with how do my kids, be okay with with the culture, because Sanjay is Indian, but he's not totally religious. I mean, his mom is, but we still do things the Guyanese way. And so like Holi, we had Holi. It was so cold here, we couldn't even go outside to play with some powder or anything. So I am worried that they will lose that cultural identity, so to speak, that we are accustomed to. And that's my struggle on a daily basis.
Just as a brief aside, online, there's a very good translation of the Rig Veda. It's an English translation, but it fits the meter, which is nice, by Griffith. So if you're interested in that, there's a good translation out there. But as to your main point, does anyone have any thoughts about how to preserve the cultural legacy of, especially in the diaspora? That's a big question.
But if what she said there was right. If the children understand the meaning of what you're saying, I think they'll be more attached to it. They know why we're saying this. Tomeo Mata Chapita, you are my
I
father, you're my
agree.
mother. So I'll send you some translations, Rennie. But but saying these things, I remember when Sonjay was about 3 or 4, he came here. We had a religious function, and he picked up a mic, and he and Raj and you were singing, right? He just got attracted to the gathering and to what was going on. Although he didn't know what was happening, the meaning of anything, but he picked up the mic and he was singing, and then he started hitting a drum, and he was quite happy, right? But it's because of the environment. That's why. So sometimes gathering in the temples and so on means a lot to a lot of people. It's social and it's also religious. But as I'm coming back to what Jillian said, that because between these ages you have your courting, you have boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. You get married, you go in honeymoon, and you don't have time for temple. But if you're brought up with that as a kid, you're brought up, or you've been brought up to be religious, to believe in God, to believe in doing the right things, it will stick in your head. It will be there. And later on, and from my experience, later on, I find them, as soon as these people meet 30, 35, they're back into the temple again, right? They disappear for that 10-year period, and they come back. But you must know what you're saying. You must know the meaning of what you're saying. And that's one of the difficulties of Hinduism, because everything is either in Sanskrit or Hindi. And so I take there are a lot of books these days that has translation for every single mantra we say, and there are thousands of mantras, so you could pick out 5 or 6 and just teach those children that, relevant mantras. But
So I think it's really interesting where we're landing here and where we're hoping to go with this too, which is community that is formed by faith traditions and attending in community and in fellowship, a place where we experience and process and respond to different life events, different human parts of the human experience. And how important is that in dealing with loss, dealing with a marriage that is interfaith, dealing with all different aspects of what we are going through in our lives on a daily basis.
That's so true. The idea that, having a faith community, the faith itself is instructive in how to deal with these human ideas, but having a community is also a fundamental social need to deal with hard times and to deal with difficult problems, having a sounding board. I think Amrita also has her hand up.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I think we've moved on from what I was going to say, but maybe I'll just say it anyways. So, for me, and so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Pandit Omanand's brother's daughter, and I'm the daughter of the atheist brother. And atheist mother, and so and I went to Catholic school, so it was I grew up in a Hindu family. We called ourselves Hindu, even though we weren't practicing, just much like what we're talking about here. And I was always searching, as I was growing up in Guyana, for something. So I didn't know enough about Hindu religion. I didn't know. I went to Catholic school. I tried to find something there. And I think I came out of school in my teenage years and I thought, this is it. I'm an atheist. I don't want anything to do with religion. I don't fit in anywhere. None of this makes sense to me. It's rubbish. And so, of course, Dad, completely supported that idea. I was 11 when he handed me Chariots of the Gods, and it was everything scientific, and he was trying to, move away from religion, from church. Catholic school, I know one Ash Wednesday I came there and I was yearning for something. And so, I went into the church and I had the ash put on my forehead because it was a belonging. It was just that sense of belonging. And that's what I loved most of all growing up. It was the community piece that I got from attending pujas and hawans and gitas and going to church. And I just remember coming into the car and my dad looked at me and said, "What is that nonsense in your forehead? Wipe it off." And so, I was constantly searching, and then I decided, I think in my early 20s, I thought, okay, maybe I'm not atheist, maybe I'm agnostic, because I started thinking more about spirituality. Maybe I believe there's a greater sort of there's some sort of cosmic force out there, a greater cosmic body, because how are we here? I'm trying to look for that. And I have a daughter, and because I didn't talk about religion with her, she's pretty much an atheist as well. And in my 30s, I started turning more to meditation. And I did do that in Guyana. There was a Brahma Kumaris, a spiritual center that I attended to meditate, just to try to find answers inside. I was always looking for these answers. And in my 30s, I found I don't know if you guys have done this, the Vipassana. And so it's a silent meditation. So I started doing the Vipassana classes. It's sort of like has its origins, perhaps in Buddhism. And so now I don't practice, but I do. I think I've come around to believe that, we're all connected. Everyone's connected. Everyone, everything living is connected, and I feel it intensely sometimes. Sometimes not as much because I'm not thinking about it. So it's my grandchildren. I have two grandchildren, a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And before they go to sleep every night, I taught them the Gayatri Mantra, because those pieces coming out, even though I didn't practice, those little pieces, I think grounds me. And it's just related to all the things we're talking about, about being handed down from different generations. And so I handed that gift to them. But I had the little 3-year-old ask me the other day, in the midst of saying her the Gayatri Mantra, she paused and she said, "Nani, what am I saying? What am I talking about?" And I had to try to explain a bit of that to her, what it was. So I think that's what I wanted to contribute to this conversation. So I'm still at that place now, and I'm just looking for connections, and I love all the things. Chachi, you were just talking about the temple and being there. I do love, even though I don't practice any religion at all, I love the sense of community that I feel going to any sort of congregation, any sort of gathering. It feels grounding for me. Yeah, regardless of the religious denomination. Yeah.
Right.
So that's what I wanted to say.
Great.
Thank you for adding your experience to the conversation.
Thanks.
I appreciate it. And in respect for everybody's time, we have come to the end of our first discussion. Is there anything, Douglas and Sonjay, you want to leave us with about thinking about our next time?
Douglas?
I think as we continue this series, something really valuable that we've come to in this conversation is this idea of how a faith community offers that sense of community in a way that is distinct from other types of community, and how that community is what we might want to seek more than anything in some of the difficult times that are a part of some of our future conversation topics, with our next one being grief in particular. What is it that people seek in a faith community in particular when they are struggling or feeling lost, that a non-religious secular community might not be able to offer them? I think that's something that I will be, and I hope you all will be reflecting on over the next month.
Wonderful.
Sonjay, anything that you'd like to add?
Absolutely. Look, I think this was a great discussion. And I really appreciate everyone who chimed up with their experiences. I think my takeaway is that these questions are not easy. We've kicked it around, and I have more to think about than I walked in with, certainly. So I'm really excited to explore some of these topics again next week, and to put a little more focus on it and try to dig down to the granular level and work our way up. So thank you all for being here.
So grateful to you both. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
So
Thank you, guys.
I put into the chat the website where you can find information about future sessions of this. And I think we're going to aim for once a month. And if there is interest in more often than that, then please let us know. But we will put on the website when the next offering will be at the end of April.
Great.
Thank you.
And
Very good.
you all. Grateful for you all being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Nice to see you
Good night.
all.
Okay.